move to tighten financial sanctions against the Islamic Republic. It also comes as the country prepares for key parliamentary elections in March. And that's the subject of a top story this morning. And for that, I'm joined by our international affairs editor, Annette Young. Good morning, Annette. Good morning. So as I just mentioned, the value of Iran's currency slumping dramatically. Does that then mean that sanctions against Tehran's nuclear program are now having an effect?
It certainly appears that way, Claire. And the rial lurched to a new low at 16,800 to the dollar, which was down from 15,200 at the end of last week. And just to show you what a difference a year makes, a year ago it was at 10,500. Now that slump has very much been blamed at those US sanctions which target the Iranian central bank. Now the White House has moved to blacklist any company or institution that deals or trades with the central bank, and therefore make it very hard for Tehran to sell its oil. Now, this also means that Tehran's threat to close the Straits of Hormuz, which was attempting to do last week by saying, you know, if this continues, we will have no other choice but to choke the passage. Well, really, at the end of the day, many see that as just an empty threat, because if they do that, then they're going to block this passage for vessels which they are there, therefore trading with other countries to sell their oil, such as China. It simply just can't afford to do that. Now, in the meantime, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is saying that his administration is doing everything it can to stave off a further drop in its currency value, and thus most likely they're going to start selling off some of their hard currency reserves. Now, we do know that Iran has somewhere in the order of around $80 billion in reserves as a result of its fuel sales. But in the meantime, much more importantly, and this is what the international community is looking at very closely, there's a lot of frustration which is simmering among the working class and the lower middle class over the fact that the president's economic policies are not working. Basically, the prices of most consumer goods have risen substantially, and many people are struggling to make ends meet. And so therefore, you know, the international community is looking very closely at that to see whether in fact that's going to play out in terms of having effect on what that administration is going to do in terms of its contentious nuclear program.
And where we might see the effects for President Ahmadinejad will be during the parliamentary elections in March. Now, of course, in 2009 there were massive protests after the vote, and there's been a deepening rift among the country's hardline rulers since. So now this is seen as a crucial test for Ahmadinejad, this next vote.
It really is, and the reality is that this Iranian regime is at a crossroads. These upcoming parliamentary elections next March are not really going to be reformer versus conservative, because the reality is most of the reform parties have indicated that they're going to boycott the elections. What it's going to do is pit one conservative against another, primarily President Ahmadinejad against the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, the two men have been at loggerheads for some time, and that rift reached a new low about a year ago when Ahmadinejad actually sacked a minister in his cabinet who was deemed to be a protege of Khamenei. The two men are very much similar in terms of conservative ideology. There's no difference. They both speak the same revolutionary vocab. But this current power struggle is really about consolidating control over state resources. And effectively, since that big breach in May last year, what various camps have been doing on the conservative side of the Iranian political spectrum is lining up between one man versus the other. And the president camp at the moment really pulls the string of the Interior Ministry, which is in charge of conducting these elections, while the Supreme Leader's group controls the very important Guardian Council, and they are the ones who will vet candidates and certify the final results. So this is going to be a very interesting election to watch. And briefly, do you think there might be protests after the election, like in 2009? Well, with the reformers saying that they're going to boycott these elections, the odds are probably not clear. But, you know, we saw a taste of what the regime is prepared to put up with or not put up with, and we saw that back in February 2011 when they tried to stage their own mini Arab Spring in Tehran, and the crackdown as a result, you know, we saw at least 3 people die, hundreds being hospitalised and others being arrested. So clearly the regime is not going to put up with anything like what we saw in 2009. And but it is in a quandary because it's always boasted that it's high turnout in elections is a symbol of its legitimacy. But if there is an election boycott and there is subsequent turmoil, well, then, you know, it will have quite the opposite effect. And again, this is what the international community will be waiting to watch and see.
OK, thanks very much, Annette. Annette Young with Top Story there. Moving on now to anger in Nigeria.